Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cracking open one of the retail industry's absolute toughest puzzles: how Taiwanese retail giant Shinкong Mitsukoshi managed to capture a demographic that stores have literally been chasing for decades, usually with very, very little success. But by completely rethinking retail psychology, physical layouts, and their entire strategy, they managed to tap into a massive new audience. It is honestly a masterclass in market research and design.
Okay, let's dive right into the staggering statistic that started the whole thing. Despite men making up exactly half of the population, Shinкong Mitsukoshi's internal data showed they accounted for a mere 15 to 18% of their traditional department store shoppers. The remaining 85%, all female. It was an incredibly lopsided business model. I mean, when you have an entire half of the population just missing from your aisles, you're sitting on a massive untapped opportunity.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll cover the missing male shopper, 3 rejected business models, designing for male psychology, removing walls and friction, and finally unlocking unexpected retail results. Section 1. The missing male shopper.
Now we have to ask the most obvious question. Where exactly were all these guys going while the industry fought tooth and nail over that 85% of female shoppers? Well, Oh Young-hui, the executive driving this project, perfectly captured the problem with this quote. He said, "It's not that Taiwanese men don't buy, it's that they can't buy it in Taiwan." What's so brilliant about this is how it completely shifts the blame. It's no longer about the consumer not wanting to shop, it's about the market simply failing to serve them. They realized that men aged 25 to 40 who wanted trendy clothes essentially had 0 local options.
And you know what? The data entirely backed up this paradigm shift. The global male luxury market wasn't just sitting there. It was seeing double-digit growth. Stats from their partner Japan's Shinjuku Isetan men's store showed Taiwanese men weren't just casually shopping there. They were consistently in the top 3 demographics for total shoppers. And get this, they held the absolute #1 spot for per capita spending. They were dropping massive amounts of money. They were just doing it abroad or hunting through tiny alleyway boutique buyers. Plus, unlike Korean or Chinese shoppers who leaned toward traditional luxury, Taiwanese men showed a uniquely high demand for Japanese designer brands. They had the cash, for sure. They just needed a place to spend it locally.
Section 2. 3 rejected business models. Recognizing the gap was one thing, but figuring out exactly how to fill it took years of planning. They actually tested and threw out 3 obvious industry standard models by really looking closely at their local constraints. Model 1 was dedicating a whole building to men, inspired by Japan. But actually, they realized Taiwan's market size just wasn't big enough yet to support that. Model 2 was all luxury, basically gathering top-tier brands like you'd see in Europe or Seoul. They scrapped that because the risk was way too high, and frankly, recruiting those brands is incredibly tough. And finally, Model 3 was all suits, also inspired by Japan. But they rejected this one after taking a harsh look at local reality. That decision really came down to the stark cultural differences between the 2 markets. See, in Japan, suits basically function as a mandatory professional uniform. It's a staple need. But in Taiwan, suits are mostly just a personal style preference. It's rarely a strict requirement. So the crucial takeaway here is that they realized building a floor around formal wear would be a massive mistake. Instead, local men under 40 really needed trendy designer casual wear. Section 3. Designing for male psychology.
Okay, so they knew what to sell. But how do you sell it to a demographic that typically hates traditional shopping? Their biggest breakthrough was the wall-less concept. Imagine a massive 300-ping open-floor retail environment with 0 brand barriers. No separate little stores within the store. The logic here is deeply psychological. You know, women might not mind browsing from boutique to boutique, but men? They often feel way too pressured or just plain embarrassed to walk into an isolated single-brand counter, look around, and then awkwardly walk out without buying anything. By removing the physical walls entirely, Skm created this pressure-free mix-and-match laboratory. You can grab a shirt from one brand and pants from another without feeling trapped by a salesperson.
Section 4. Removing walls and friction. Completely reinventing the department store floor plan did not happen without a massive fight. As you can probably guess, international brands absolutely hated the idea at first. They were highly skeptical of a unified layout where they couldn't control their own pristine storefronts. It took 1.5 years of intense, grueling negotiations. The Skm team literally flew all the way to Paris for face-to-face talks with major designers like the Japanese streetwear giant Undercover, just to convince them.
So how did they finally win them over? By leveraging their partner Isaten's 23-year successful track record of doing this exact same unified floor plan in Shinjuku. That Japanese success story was the leverage they needed to finally get these brands to trust the vision. But it wasn't just brand stubbornness. They had physical constraints, too. The designated space on the third floor of the A9 building was a really narrow, challenging layout. And narrow spaces make it super hard to get customers to stop and browse. Their internal solution? Absolutely brilliant. They anchored the space with social concepts. They put bistros like Backyard Junior and Inoteca on one end and a social cafe on the other, mixing in grooming products right alongside the clothes. This ensured that these typically impatient male shoppers would actually linger, maybe grab a beer, and naturally just browse the open floor concept.
Section 5. Unlocking unexpected retail results. So they built the space, fought the brands, and finally opened the doors. Let's look at the hard data from 6 months post-launch. Did the gamble pay off? 80%. Let that sink in. When they launched, the team thought hitting 50% new shoppers would be a total home run. But an incredible 80% of buyers turned out to be completely brand new customers who had never, ever shopped at Shinkong Mitsukoshi before. They perfectly hit their target of 25 to 40-year-old men.
And these weren't just guys doing some light window shopping. The financial metrics were phenomenal. The floor's overall average transaction value jumped 15% compared to before the renovation. Even more impressive is the loyalty. 18% of these new male members came back and purchased 3 or more times within just 6 months. 7 to 8% repurchased 5 or more times. Every single psychological insight they bet on was entirely validated by this data. Now, their absolute secret weapon for the impatient man was their service room flow. A customer simply scans a QR code, steps into a private VIP room, and a consultant actually brings them a curated mix of outfits from across 20 different brands on the floor to try on all at once. Usually, strict brand rules prevent you from taking clothes to another brand's dressing room. But here, the walls are gone. Over 100 users a month utilize this, and they end up spending 2 to 3 times the average amount simply because the friction of shopping is completely removed.
And they kept adapting based on direct feedback from Instagram. For example, they saw a massive, unexpected demand for hats. Why? Well, Taiwan's unforgiving humidity makes a fresh haircut fall flat instantly, so guys just wanted a cool hat to throw on. They also noticed a huge preference for structured designer shirts over the basic trendy t-shirts that are popular in Japan. They constantly cycle in new pop-up brands every 2 weeks to meet this highly specific, evolving local demand.
I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. For years, the industry just assumed men simply didn't want to shop. But SKM proved they just hated the way they were being forced to shop. If simply removing physical walls, rethinking the layout, and eliminating purchase anxiety can summon an entirely missing demographic, what other established consumer truths out there are actually just the result of bad design? How many other impossible business problems are just waiting for the walls to be knocked down? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the design around you.